All right, welcome back to Inside the Hedges. Matthew Bartlett here, Director and Managing Editor of The Roost. I am joined, as always, by Taylor McHargue, former Rice football quarterback, and we are here to break down Rice football no matter which way the ball bounces. And this week it was not so fortunate for the Rice Owls. So we're here to walk through what went down against Rice in Denton against North Texas, and then we're going to go ahead and look at the UTEP game. So more ground to cover this week than the past, because at least we had a football game, but it wasn't all sunshine and roses, was it, Taylor?
It was frustrating. I mean, that's one that I know Coach Bloomgren in his presser talked about. You got to figure out a way to close these type of games out. And the momentum in the first half, really after the fourth down stop that they didn't pick up, and then the muffed punt, just weren't able to get momentum back on their side, and came back out in the second half. Third quarter was really flat. That was one of maybe the most poor quarter that they'd played since the first quarter against Middle Tennessee. So disappointing loss, but you got to turn right back around and have a much improved UTEP team come into town this weekend.
Yeah, you mentioned the fourth down play, and I thought it was interesting because Bloomgren admitted this week in his media press conference heading into the UTEP game that was a decision that in years past he probably wouldn't have made, but because of the play of Mike Collins and what he'd done so far, and because of how good this defense is, he decided to roll the dice. And when I was watching it in real time, we'd just seen Rice go down the field and score twice, and I'm like, man, if you get this in the end zone, you're talking about 17-0, which feels a lot different. So I got excited about going for it. Maybe I'm more of a risk taker. I wouldn't have thought that, but I didn't have any problem with the decision. But from that point, yeah, I don't know what it was, but if you would have told me that the Rice defense was going to be able to, hold Jalen Darden, nation's touchdown reception leader, to one touchdown catch and 4 yards, and Jason Bean, he really had that 166-yard run, and that was it. I would have been quite content. I mean, this is a high-profile offense. They got 27 points.
The defense for Rice, again, stepped up and played a pretty sound game for the most part. Gave up a couple big plays, but this is a North Texas offense that we knew was high-powered, and I was more disappointed in the offensive side of the ball, especially in the rushing game, for an offense that Rice has branded itself a ground and pound, run the ball effectively, get ahead of the chains, and then take your shot plays. Well, now it's turned into the opposite. Now it's really the passing attack is definitely top half of the country. I think it's 40th in the country right now, and the rushing attack is not nearly what we expected it to be. But the defensive side of the ball, I thought they played really well, limited a North Texas offense that, I mean, you saw what they did to Middle Tennessee. They've had over 700 yards of total offense against Middle Tennessee. So there's still plenty to improve on. In those, you talk about the fourth down play, I was fine with the decision. And Coach Bloomgren talked about, look, I didn't think, we weren't going to, 13 points wasn't going to get us a win. I wanted to try, trying to score touchdowns here. Ultimately, the game plays out, and I think it would have really helped to have those points and keep the momentum. I just didn't love the play selection. I thought the route combination they ran wasn't a great short yardage or more like a 2-point play. But you live and learn. I'm fine with the aggressiveness. I love the decision-making there, and the play – I just didn't love the play calling there.
Yeah, and you mentioned the rushing attack, and that's part of the confusing bit of the Rice offense this year, right? Like we're thrilled with Mike Collins, 10 touchdowns, 1 interception in 3 games. I would have taken that, regardless of any stretch of games in the future. If you can tell me I can get a quarterback that'll throw 10 touchdowns and 1 pick, I will sign up, no questions asked. But in this game, the rushing attack was interesting because there was times, especially early on in the game, where things seemed to be going pretty well. Kalen Griffin ended up having his first career start with Juma Taviano a little bit nicked up. But really kind of the story there was the pressure that North Texas was able to get in the middle of the line in that interior. And then the fumbles, man. Just Rice has put the ball on the ground way too many times, 4 fumbles against North Texas. And you put all those together, and that just kind of sets you up for a recipe for failure. It's hard to win when you have 4 fumbles.
I thought 2 things. Coach Bloomgren also in his presser talked about how North Texas brought a physical tone of play that I don't know that Rice was anticipating or expecting. But he's exactly right. I mean, really on both sides of the ball, especially Rice's offensive line, they were outmatched by North Texas defensive front. Their front seven really took it to Rice's offensive line and won the battle over the course of the game. And then on the other side, you mentioned the turnovers. I've never seen 3 straight games with a muff punt. I've never seen it. And it's also, Austin Trammell would be the first one to tell you, especially this one, just let that one go. You're not salvaging much field position. We were going to have the ball with good field position. It was like the 40-yard line. And those are just mental errors that you can't have those happen. And you go back and look, the turnovers against Middle Tennessee ultimately were the difference. And then the turnovers in this one were the difference as well. And that's football in general. I mean, that's any level. That's kind of a no-brainer. You talk about if you win the turnover battle, more often than not, you're giving yourself a chance.
Yeah, it was interesting to me on that muff by Trammell on that punt. It almost, I was not in the room. I didn't know what the game plan was. But when North Texas came out with, I don't even know what you call that, kind of the line drive punt, almost seemed kind of caught off guard. Maybe not something they were expecting, and maybe the adjustment there not fast enough. But yeah, like if anything else, when we get to UTEP, there can't be a muff punt. Like at that point, that you can only coach so much. So we definitely got to get past that.
Yeah, 100%. Special teams turnovers in any facet of the game aren't acceptable, but special teams turnovers especially. You're getting the ball back. That's the worst opportunity, and it flips the field. You're almost always giving the ball back to the offense with a short field.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rice on the other front, they had a roughing the punter call that went in their favor, and then they had I think it was an 88-yard kick return touchdown that got pulled off the board on a block in the back. So, we're talking about a team that only had 4 or 5, flags the entire game, and that one again came out costly. But before we get too far, we talked about the pressure on the inside, and I don't know how much of a pro football focused guy you are or not. I've heard everything under the sun about their numbers and stuff, but they put out a number for Dion Novell, the Conference USA Defensive Player of the Week this week, with 5 tackles for a loss. And I think he had a sack on top of that, a forced fumble. Gave him a grade of 99 for the game, which is perfect. And honestly, that might have felt too low. I don't think I've seen a interior defender have their way with the Rice offensive line to that degree in the past 3 years.
And that's where, when you have an interior D lineman playing like that, that's where you see a rushing attack really get stymied, especially one like Rice. Rice's rushing attack is between the tackles for the most part. It's not one that's known for getting on the perimeter and stretching the field sideline to sideline in the running attack. So when you have an interior D lineman play that well, that's where you got to get a little bit more creative. Okay, how do we get the ball on the edge? Is it fly sweep? Is it jet sweep motion? Is it bubble screens? How do we get out on the perimeter and get away from this guy that's being this disruptive? Back in the day, we played Vinny Curry, who's still playing in the league, played for Marshall, and they moved him around and would put him inside some at Marshall, even though he was a defensive end, and was incredibly disruptive. Dontari Poe played at Memphis when I was at Rice. The exact same thing, very disruptive in the middle. When you play against a guy that's that good in the middle, don't run right at him. Figure out ways to get the ball on the edge and get away from that guy.
It kind of makes sense that with Elijah Garcia and DeBraylon Carroll, people aren't running very well against Rice this year. They have that going for them. I guess maybe not so much expecting that popping up against them. But I guess you live and learn. The positive is we won't have to deal with somebody that hopefully disruptive in the middle this week. But that was another thing. Another thing that we want to get to is I just kind of want to talk big picture before we get on to a couple game balls and we jump ahead to UTEP. If you're going back and you're watching this film and everybody's frustrated, and deservedly so, was there one thing in particular that you kind of looked at and you said, you know what, if we keep doing this, it's going to be all right? What was the silver lining here?
I think the silver lining is that this team is closer than I think a lot of people realize. Go back to the Middle Tennessee loss. Go back to the third quarter of this game. They are so close to putting people away, right? If they convert that 4th down early in the first half, score a touchdown on that drive. It's 17-0. I think this, and they're, you don't muff a punt. I think things like that. This game looks a lot different. What's encouraging to me is that they're close. Now, being close and actually closing out games are two different things. Some teams really struggle with that. Look at the NFL right now. The Chargers are known right now for blowing games late. When you have that stigma, it's hard to shake things like that. But young teams, 2012, for when I was there, we had a hard time closing games out. And then we finally learned how to do it. And we won a bunch of close games in 2013 when we won conference. And that's not unique to Rice. That's not unique anywhere. It doesn't matter what level. You got to figure out ways to close out close games. And that's where confidence just in yourself and in your team comes from. You got to win a couple of those. And they're close. So the silver lining to me is you've got a handful of games left this season. And really all of this, I know that there's going to be there's going to be bowl games. There's going to be some sort of national champion crown. But to me, this whole year sort of feels like a lease on life where it's almost like a dry, a rehearsal, if you will, for you got so many of these kids coming back next year. So Rice has to figure out a way to close out these close games and win and not beat yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for the downside of what needs to be cleaned up, we've hit on it. It's turnovers. You can't do it. We've seen the offense do enough. I guess even through the first 2 games and against North Texas, when they have good field position and they have the guys that can capitalize, I'm pretty optimistic that we'll get the offensive line to kind of bounce back. Look at the film, and I will say, Noville 5 tackles for a loss in the first half. He didn't have any. In the second half, the coaching staff kind of adjusted and were able to get the pressure away from him up the middle. And then, unfortunately, North Texas adjusted to the adjustment and they got pressure off the edges. And Mike Collins ended up sacked, I think 7 times, the most of any game in the Seth Luttrell era at North Texas. So I know you just can't throw a game out, but it was just so strange and unexpected. Sometimes it happens.
And there's something to be said about you have 2 games postponed the way that they did, and you have this break in time, but everybody's dealing with stuff like that right now, right? I mean, this is not unique to Rice. And so you got to figure out a way to bring your own momentum, bring your own energy, have the mental toughness to things like muffed punts. That's what frustrates me just as a, fan of the program. You can't have those. You get like 1 of those a season, 3 in the same season. And now you start talking about, okay, what changes do we need to make with personnel on the field to make sure that this doesn't happen anymore? Because once, okay, it's a mistake. Twice, now we've got an issue. 3 times, we've got a systematic problem with not taking care of the ball. And I can assure you, if I had 3 when I was playing, if I had 3 mistakes like that in a row, I got benched and they put Dreyfus in. And it happened multiple times in my career. So all that to say, I do think they're close and they're playing much more competitively than they have, in the past couple of years. You look at the momentum they built in the last 3 games of 2019. They're close to putting a couple of these away, and then you'll really see that momentum start to build in these close games. They'll go out and win games instead of letting the other team lose the game. There's a difference, right? Going out and winning the game and taking a win versus letting the other team make mistakes and then you sort of backdoor into a win. There's a difference there, and I think Rice is close.
Yeah, and I honestly felt like that we started the show, talked about that 4th down play. That felt like a moment where Rice was going to take it. And that's what they were trying to do. You up 17-0, and then all of a sudden you have an offense that I think at that point they'd gained something like 16 yards in the first quarter. It was everything was rolling, and that's a point where things changed. But not this week. We'll I guess try again next week against UTEP. And I want to jump ahead, but I do want to hand out game balls. And I know I got on to you a couple weeks ago for handing out a game ball to I think you only did 2. I want to cheat. I'm going to hand out a game ball to, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 guys. I want to give it to the Rice secondary in this game. What they've been able to do with so many guys coming in and out of the lineup, and what they did against Jalen Darden. His one big play got a freshman safety in the slot and just made an incredible play. And if that's the only thing he gets on you, it's fantastic. If I have to pick one guy, I'm going to go with Chris Boudreaux at corner, who's a converted wide receiver. And I don't know if you caught this on the broadcast, but he's over on the sideline, and Miles McCord gets nicked up and has to go out for a play or two. Andrew Bird's on the other side. Bird and Boudreaux both wear 15, so Boudreaux has to go and put on another jersey on the sideline, and he comes out and he's wearing 96, like an offensive lineman jersey, and it looks like it's lanky and it's baggy, and like everyone in the stadium's like, they're gonna throw it right at him, and they do, and he breaks up the pass in the end zone. It was fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. Rule of thumb: throw at the corner that's wearing number 96. you typically will find success there. But yeah, I love that. I'm not breaking any stereotypes here. I'm going with Mike Collins, and I think it's partially because he really, due to our the inability to run the football effectively, he was most of the production on offense. But it's also just the performances week in and week out that he's put together. He's playing at a really high level. 10 touchdowns, 1 interception. We haven't had that level of productivity in a long time at that position. And if he keeps it up, who knows what happens next year with him? I don't know if he's in a position to come back, but he's doing a lot of special things at the quarterback position right now.
Yeah, I'll put that out there right now. We'd love to have him. I believe everyone is eligible.
Yeah, so. I think that's right.
We're going to have to make this the honorary Mike Collins Award if he keeps. What do you have? Another 300 yards in this game, 327, 2 touchdowns, 167.8 rating. That's wild. And this is the third time this season. Unreal. So jump ahead and look at the UTEP game. We have a little bit on them so far. This is an interesting team in that they had only won a couple games in their season so far, and they come out and they win 3 of their first 4 and have the chance to, with a win over Rice this weekend, get to 500 in late November, which is something that hasn't been said in El Paso in quite some time. I'm not sure I remember the last time, but we can't help but make the comparison to some degree. Mike Bloomgren and Dana Dimmel coming in at the same time, inheriting 2 programs in a bit of a rebuild. What has this kind of year shown us about Dimmel and what's going on at UTEP?
Well, I think you brought up the comparison to Coach Bloomgren. I think there's a lot of similarities in that they took over programs that were struggling, that lost a lot of depth when the last coaching change happened. And Coach Dimmel, it's been a long time since UTEP was bowl eligible, was competing in Conference USA. You got to go back to the Trevor Vitito era, right? I mean, we're talking almost 10 years ago that they were really competitive in Conference USA. And now they are. They haven't closed out any games in conference yet, but they've played teams tough. Even the UTSA game, that stat line looks ugly by the end of the game. But they go into half, it's a back and forth game. And if they don't give up a big play right before half, they're winning at half against UTSA. So this is a team that at the quarterback position, they're playing. I mean, they've got Hardison at quarterback has an absolute rocket. I mean, he throws a frozen rope. It travels like 65 yards in the air for a touchdown against UTSA. There's not a lot of guys that play in Conference USA that can throw it that far and that are that accurate. It just doesn't happen that often in this conference. So they've got some talent. Their front 7 is talented. Coach Dimmel is slowly putting together a program that give them a couple years, maybe next year, they're going to start to close some of these games out and really compete for CUSA West.
Yeah, I think you saw it last year. They had a bunch of those games that might have been 20-point games the year before and were 7-point games. And right. That's something that you look at the box score and it is what it is. But, the coaches are not box score scouting and they're well aware of what's going on. I thought it was interesting that Rice defensive lineman Braylon Carroll this week, when he was talking about UTEP, he said, every run in the book, like they had it. And I'm like, right. When he was saying that, I'm like, it sounds like you're talking about the offense that you practice again all week. We're going to see a fullback. We got a quarterback that's going to stay, under center and call plays. And it's, kind of matching up. If North Texas was the antithesis of, maybe what we've kind of built the intellectual brutality up to be. Mike Collins is changing that. We're throwing the ball around a bit more, but UTEP is going to bring an offense it's going to look a lot to what Rice has traditionally done. I will say something that's kind of stands out a little bit to me is I think if you look across most metrics, they're about middle of the pack, basically across the board. Kind of somewhere in the middle when it comes to their offense, somewhere in the middle on the defense. The secondary has been okay. They've had some moments. They got some talent back there, and so it's maybe a UTEP team that is just okay to good at just about everything. They seem, fairly well-rounded, whereas North Texas, coming into the game was pretty clear. One side of the ball is light years ahead of the other.
UTEP's pretty well-rounded. They are their offense has kept them in several of these games. Their defense, their front seven is pretty solid. They've got some interior D linemen. They brought in some JUCO guys, and their interior D line is pretty good. I imagine that's going to be a point of emphasis for the Rice offense is coming off this game against North Texas, where North Texas interior D-line made it tough to run the football. You're going to get the same kind of problems. I mean, UTEP's going to watch this tape from this past weekend and say, look, if we can control the line of scrimmage like they did, we've got a shot. So there's going to be an emphasis on how does Rice run the ball effectively. But again, I go back to UTEP can get the ball down the field in the passing game. They've got some dynamic receivers and a quarterback with a really strong arm. When you turn on the tape, they have more route combinations to the field than you normally see for a team that is struggling, right? Like when you just look at a box score or you look at a record and it's a below 500 team, a lot of times you don't expect to see their quarterback doing a 5-step drop and flinging it all the way across the field multiple times a game. So it's another team that they're just having to figure out how to close out games. They got a lot of young guys still playing, and there's a lot of similarities to this Rice team. Both they're learning on the fly. Got a lot of youth, and this is an important game for both of them, both of these programs for building momentum and building confidence.
Yeah, you speak to that momentum piece, and that's another one that it only exists when it's hurting you, right? But you're talking about a Rice program now sitting at 1-2, and you really felt like the first game against Middle Tennessee very easily could have won had not a bounce, and the North Texas one, you feel like you play that game again, and there's a better Rice team that can show up, and that's competitive. So you enter this game, and who knows? That's the thing with this season. Rice has 3 games left on the schedule after UTEP, but I asked Bloomgren this week, I said, who are you playing next week? And he said, well, I talked to Doc Holliday at Marshall, but honestly, we don't know. Right. So it's hard to speak to the impact of this on the rest of the season before we get there. But as far as getting back to 500, and as weird of a year this is, and getting the chance to, finish this strange season above 500, that seems about as clear of a picture as you could paint to say this team is getting better in year 3, right?
Yeah, there's no doubt. And regardless of how many games you played, who you played, what games got canceled, figuring out a way to scrap and claw and get above 500 would be a win for the season. You could look back on this strange year and say, go back to the 3rd year for Coach Bloomgren and you get above 500 in year 3. I think that's going to be considered a success in some variety to everybody, right? And then who knows what the bowl picture is going to look like. It's too far out right now to speculate how many of these games will be played, who you're playing, who's going to be invited in. But I will say this, Rice needs to win this game and get some confidence, because their last 2 games as they're scheduled right now are potentially the best 2 teams in the conference. Marshall is ranked, right? They're number 15 in the college football playoff poll right now, and deservedly so, playing fantastic football. And UAB's got a ton of talent, and Rice can get a lot of momentum back on their side with a win this week, but the schedule does not lighten up after this weekend.
Yeah, it's one of those things. If you think back with me, like all of 4 or 5 weeks ago, when we looked at the season as a whole, that there's a lot of teams in this conference that are pretty good to okay. and Rice finds themselves right now, at least by how they've played, squarely in the middle of that.
Yep.
And as you mentioned, they're going to get to the crop eventually if we get there in a couple weeks. So we'll see. I would agree. This is a game that I think most odds makers, depending on how much stock you put in that, would say Rice should be the favorite in. I think from what we've seen on the field, even if you go back to last year, Giovanni Johnson making one of his, if not the first career start. We saw a talent gap on the field between these two programs, as long as you got, Austin Trammell and those guys around there. So you can't make a direct comparison to last year to this year, because obviously Rice beat North Texas last year and they beat Middle Tennessee. And so we saw the reversal there. But I think we have seen enough to know that this is a game that, as we say again, is not going to require any Herculean effort from either side of the ball for Rice. It's going to be doing the little things. I'm going to speak it now. There will not be a muffed punt for Rice this weekend. Bloomgren would tear out the hair. It's not going to happen. So if Rice can play their kind of ball, stay disciplined, and just hopefully Mike Collins throws for a billion yards again, as we've come accustomed to. But it should be that simple. That this is a game that if Rice plays their way, we should feel pretty confident in.
Yeah, make no mistake about it. I mean, I think they're 11-point favorites right now. If you're favored by 2 scores, especially you're at home, they're the better football team. But you got to go prove it. I mean, you still got to play the game, right? These odds, especially in college football, we see all the time. Sometimes they don't mean anything. So Rice takes care of the football, gets back to running the ball effectively. It's been proven that Mike Collins in this passing attack is pretty efficient. And then force some turnovers on the other side, and I think Rice wins this game comfortably. But you got to go out and do it, right? You can't have 4 fumbles again. Those are the things that, regardless of time off or whatever issues are presented, you can't have those things.
Yeah, and one thing we didn't know that Bloomgren did mention this week, that hope to have Jumo Ottaviano back. So having him back on the field is never a bad thing. I think Kalen did a great job in his first start, but I would certainly, the more playmakers you can have, yes, please. So we'll see. We will be back here next week to recap. Hopefully a game this weekend. I feel like we can't take it for granted that we get to play football at this point, even with everything going on. But you will be in the booth this week, and we can hear you again.
Yeah, absolutely. So fingers crossed there's no issues between now and then, and we get to kick this one off. So very excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I am looking forward to it. As always, as we do every week, kind of drop some plugs so you can, this doesn't have to be just a Wednesday night thing. We'd love y'all to send us notes and stuff throughout the week. Let us know what you think about the show or Rice or anything in between. So please go check out atTheRoost.com and go check out on patreon.com/atTheRoost. Get all your insider notes and stuff, practice, everything going on. We have, this is a football podcast. We'll stick to what we allegedly might know something about, but Rice basketball is underway. There's a lot of stuff going on. So do make sure that you're plugged in. The sports year is continuing, and that's certainly exciting. So go ahead. Where can we grab you on Twitter? And then we'll sign off.
Yeah, at McHargue16, pretty active on there, and very excited about this game. And again, hopefully there are no issues. But thanks everybody that tunes into this. We love doing this and talking Rice football. No, it's a small community, but we appreciate you guys tuning in, and happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Yeah, give him a follow. Check everything out at the Roost, and go eat some turkey. Adios, guys. Rice fight.